Okay, it's a good time to stop and check, make sure you're on the right track. If you're working to a pattern, it doesn't hurt to lay it on there and see if you're heading the right direction. And fortunately, we are. We're on track. This, what you see here, is about as far as I typically take them over on the powered equipment. As you can tell, very bulky and extremely rough and clunky in here. That's because I true all this up, clean all this up with hand tools. I don't like trying to get in here with the powered equipment because it's first of all, you can't quite get this shape with any of the attachments I have anyway, and it's really easy to screw this up over there. I enjoy the shaping process with hand tools anyway. So a couple things you want to keep in mind. We basically did what we wanted our final guard shape to be after we fit the guard and used that template and scribed it on here. So what we're doing over there at the 2x72 and the disc is just sort of cleaning up what we already had. You want to be careful, especially on the belt grinder and even the disc with like a 120 grit disc. You can take a lot of material, especially off the lugs out here where it's thin, and then totally change the shape, and then you're gonna have to chase it from the other side. And then of course we want this thing symmetrical, so you want to keep an eye that your overall shape is symmetrical, and not just that it's symmetrical on its own, but based off our ricasso, off our foundation. So this is one of those things, I've done enough of these, I usually just sort of eyeball it. But if you're not comfortable with that, or if you're having a hard time seeing especially if you take off a whole lot of material past what you had scribed on there after doing a template, you can take your dial caliper and use the depth gauge on the end of it. I put post-it notes on the ricasso to protect it, and we'll just come out, push that in until we take our reading. I don't know if that shows up. It's 206 thousandths if you can't see it. And come over this side. No, it's pretty close. 205. So that's an easy way to check that you're going to stay even side to side off of your foundation. And if you have any semblance of a point to your guard lugs, you want to keep an eye on those and make sure that whatever the apex is out here on the lug, that it's centered in the thickness of our ricasso, front and back. And it's also would be a good time to go ahead and refresh our center line on here, and then I'll show you how I put a couple other reference marks on here as well. One of the things that has firmly established me as one of the most famous knife makers in Castle Rock, Washington, is the way I do this transition from handle to guard. And I can do it all by eye, but just like with the center line and the handle, if you can do put some reference lines on here, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to go from roughed in on the grinder to that. So we'll go back to the surface plate and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, we just re-established our center line, done the length of this thing, and then since I clearly care about the earth, I recycle phone books. Give yourself a little protective coating on the blade there, and then my snazzy 123 block from the other videos that has this funky looking piece of surface ground steel added to it. All this vertical element is doing is giving me a perfect 90 coming up off of this block. And so then we can lay our blade up here pinch it against that vertical element. Now that we have it in that position, that center line that we created down the length of our handle is now perfectly perpendicular to our granite surface plate. Now with the blade firmly held against that vertical element by the ricasso still, we can take our shop built surface gauge that holds a fine tip Sharpie, and we can set it to a height that we think is going to work well for that transition. And we just scribe a line. Since this is G10, we might as well go ahead and extend that line down into the handle. If this was wood, I would do the reference line on the stainless guard with the marker, and then I would extend the line down with one of the other gauges with the pencil. And we just turn this around, and we can add a reference line on this side. Then we can adjust our height. This one I actually just turn it all the way around. And I've done enough of these, I have a pretty good idea of where this transition needs to be. If you're starting out, it's going to take some trial and error probably. So there again, make sure this is pinched against her nice and tight. We draw another reference line. We swing this around to the side we started with, and add a reference line on this side. Now at this point we have a couple nice reference lines to work off of. I rarely do this, but we can add some more reference lines if our granite surface plate is just past the front edge of our workbench, or at least flush with it, but preferably about 1/8 of an inch past the front of our workbench. Then we can do one more layout operation on there. You'll need a strip of paper to protect the face of the guard. Lay that down on the edge of the surface plate. Now we can firmly place our face of our guard against our surface plate, and that's going to allow this to rest on our surface plate. And now that center line that's in our handle is perfectly perpendicular, but it's in this plane. We've taken our surface gauge and we've set it so our marker point is a short height coming up off of our surface plate. And we can come over here, add a line here, add one here, flip our knife around, and just like that, we've easily added reference lines to work off of. Like I mentioned, I rarely do those last ones that we just did. I don't usually find it necessary, but when you're starting out, it'll help. And on some, I have a really hard time, like something just will not quite seem to be lining out right, and I'll go ahead and throw those on there, and usually that'll help me see where it's at. So I think it's worth giving it a shot. Now while we're talking about guard lugs, especially for all you guys over in Italy that have been saying, oh, Nick Wheeler makes his guard lugs too thin. First of all, we're gonna have to agree to disagree. There's a couple things here. Personally, I think really thick guard lugs, they look clunky. They add material and weight that isn't necessary, and I think that they're typically a sign of a newer maker, because a lot of times newer makers are afraid to take these down thin. I personally see no reason to have these thick. I think that visually they look much nicer when they're taken down thin, and like I said, you're taking away material that doesn't need to be there. This is 4/16 stainless steel. Basically, all this guard is really doing is keeping your hand from sliding up onto the sharp parts of this knife. And if you're doing something where you know, even as thin as I take these guard lugs, if you're doing something that these guard lugs end up getting smashed and bent down onto your hand, you're already in a world of hurt, and you got much bigger problems than I cannot possibly think of a scenario other than you taking a knife and beating on it with a hammer where these guard lugs are going to get smashed down onto your hand. So I don't know, that's just how I feel about it. So like I said, I know for whatever reason a lot of guys over in Italy feel pretty strongly about how I do this, so I wanted to take a second here and talk about it since we're on the subject. So anyway, with that said, let's go break out some hand tools and dial the shape of this thing in.